My daughter-in-law slid a manila folder across the kitchen table and said, "We had an attorney draw this up. It's really the most logical solution for everyone." I sat there staring at that folder like it was a live grenade. Inside was a quitclaim deed. My name, my wife's name, our house, the house I'd spent 31 years paying off, maintaining and filling with memories. And my daughter-in-law wanted us to sign it over to my son. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. Then at my son sitting beside her, and I thought, how did we get here? Let me back up. My name is Richard. I'm 63 years old. I spent 35 years working in logistics management, and my wife Carol and I did everything the right way. We bought our home in Columbus, Ohio when our son Daniel was just 2 years old. 4 bedrooms, big backyard, quiet street. We paid it off completely in 2019. No mortgage, no debt. Just a home that belonged to us, free and clear. Daniel grew up well. He was a good kid, responsible, respectful, genuinely kind. He went to Ohio State, got a degree in civil engineering, landed a solid job. We were proud of him every single day. When he told us he was getting married, we were thrilled. We threw an engagement party right here in that backyard. I grilled for 40 people, and Carol made her famous potato salad, and everything felt perfect. Nicole came from a family in the suburbs of Cincinnati. She was sharp, well-dressed, confident. The first few times I met her, I thought she was great for Daniel. She had ambition. She had opinions. She carried herself like someone who always knew exactly what she wanted. I should have paid more attention to that last part. The first year of their marriage, they rented an apartment about 20 minutes from us. We saw them regularly, Sunday dinners, holidays, the occasional weekend visit. Things were good, normal, happy. Then Nicole got pregnant with their first child, my grandson Caleb. The apartment suddenly felt small, they said. Their lease was up. They were looking at houses, but the market was brutal. Prices had gone through the roof in Columbus. Interest rates had climbed, and on one income while Nicole was on maternity leave, qualifying for a mortgage was proving difficult. Carol and I talked about it. We have a 4-bedroom house, and it's just the 2 of us. We told them they could stay with us temporarily, 6 months, maybe 8, while they saved up and got their finances in order. Daniel was grateful. He hugged me and said, "Dad, I promise we won't wear out our welcome." Nicole smiled and said, "We'll be out of your hair before you know it." That was 4 years ago. Caleb was born. Then 14 months later, their daughter Emma arrived. 2 kids in our house, which honestly wasn't a problem. Carol and I loved having the grandchildren close. We turned the guest room into a nursery. We helped with babysitting. We had dinner together almost every night. There were good moments, genuinely good moments, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. But slowly, quietly, things started to shift. It started with small things I told myself didn't matter. Nicole rearranged the pantry because she said her system was more efficient. I came home one afternoon to find she'd moved all of Carol's dishes to the top shelf to make room for her own set she'd ordered online. Carol mentioned it to me quietly that night, said it made her feel strange in her own kitchen. I told her I'd say something to Daniel. I did. He laughed it off and said Nicole just liked to organize. I let it go. Then Nicole started referring to the house as our place when talking to her friends on the phone. I heard her once telling someone, "Yeah, our place has a huge backyard. The kids love it." I stood in the hallway and thought, did I imagine that? I let that go too. She started making decisions about the common areas without asking. She bought new living room furniture, and the old couch, which was perfectly fine, ended up in the garage. She had a friend's husband come by to repaint the downstairs hallway a different color because she said the beige was depressing. She didn't ask. She told me afterward, but she was sharing good news. I talked to Daniel again. He looked uncomfortable, said Nicole just wanted to contribute, that she felt bad not paying rent, and this was her way of helping. I said there's a difference between helping and taking over. He nodded. Nothing changed. Carol started spending more time in our bedroom. She'd come find me in the evenings and close the door, and we'd sit together watching television, and she'd say, "I feel like a guest in my own house, Richard." I hated hearing that. I hated that I didn't do more about it sooner. The financial arrangement had started to bother me too. When they moved in, we agreed they'd cover their own groceries and contribute something small toward utilities. $200 a month. Just a token. Within 6 months, Nicole had quietly stopped. When I brought it up to Daniel, he said they were saving for a down payment. I backed off. Another mistake. By the time Caleb was 2 and Emma was newborn, I realized the temporary arrangement had calcified into something permanent without anyone ever saying so out loud. They weren't looking at houses anymore. They weren't talking about timelines. They were settled in. And Nicole had begun, I can only describe it this way, nesting, not in a guest bedroom, in my house. The attorney folder moment didn't come out of nowhere. There were signs leading up to it, little comments Nicole made over the preceding months. Things like, "This house is really the perfect size for a growing family," said while looking at Carol and me with a particular expression I couldn't quite read. Or, "It must be a lot of work maintaining a place this size at your age." I was 62 at the time, by the way. 62. Not exactly 1 foot in the grave. Then she started asking questions about our finances. Subtle at first. Had we thought about long-term care insurance? Did we have an estate plan? Had we talked to a financial advisor? I told her yes, we had a will. Everything was in order. She nodded and said, "You know, a living trust might make more sense. Avoids probate, easier transfer of assets." I thought it was an odd thing for my daughter-in-law to bring up at a Tuesday night dinner. I mentioned it to Carol. She said, "Richard, she's been researching something. I can feel it." Carol has good instincts. 3 weeks later, the folder appeared on the kitchen table. Nicole had arranged for them to be there together, her and Daniel, when she presented it to me and Carol after breakfast on a Saturday. The kids were watching cartoons in the family room. It felt staged. Looking back, it absolutely was. She explained it calmly, like she'd rehearsed it. The idea was this. We would sign the house over to Daniel now, as an early inheritance. We could continue living there. She was very clear to say this, but Daniel would be on the deed. The reasoning she gave was that it would simplify our estate, reduce tax burden, and ensure the house stayed in the family. She had printed out articles. She had a 1-page summary sheet with bullet points. She had clearly put time into this. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at the table. I said, "Daniel, is this what you want?" He looked up and said, "Dad, it just makes sense logistically. Nicole's been talking to some people and—" "Did you ask for this?" I said. "Or did Nicole?" He didn't answer. I closed the folder. I pushed it back across the table. I said, "I'm going to need some time to think about this." Nicole started to say something about how it really was the most financially sound approach. And I held up my hand and said, "I heard you, Nicole." I said I need time. I stood up, put my coffee mug in the sink, and walked out to the backyard. Carol followed me a minute later. We stood on the patio together without talking for a long time. Then Carol said, quietly, "She's been planning this for a while, hasn't she?" It wasn't a question. What Nicole didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that 6 months earlier, Carol and I had already been talking to an estate planning attorney. Not because of Nicole. Because we're in our 60s, we own property, and we're responsible adults who think about the future. Our attorney, a woman named Patricia who had been recommended by our accountant, had already walked us through every option. Living trusts, beneficiary designations, transfer on death deeds, all of it. And Patricia had specifically advised us against signing over property to a child while we were still living in it. She'd said, once that deed changes hands, you lose legal control of your own home. Even if they promise you can stay, you're now a guest in someone else's property. She'd seen it go wrong before. We had already set up a revocable living trust. The house was in that trust. Our assets were protected, and critically, Daniel was listed as a beneficiary, meaning he would inherit the house upon our passing, just not before. Nicole's folder was trying to get us to do something we'd already decided not to do, for very good reasons, with professional guidance. After I'd time to process my anger, I called Patricia. I told her what had happened. She said, "Richard, this is actually more common than you'd think. Don't sign anything. You don't have to explain your legal decisions to anyone." She offered to be available if needed. Carol and I spent that weekend talking. Not arguing, not panicking, just talking. We'd been married 38 years. We knew how to sit with hard things together, On Sunday evening, I asked Daniel to come talk with me alone on the back porch. Nicole watched us go outside with an expression I recognized. She didn't like being excluded from the conversation. I told Daniel everything. About Patricia. About the trust. About why we'd made the decisions we made. I wasn't angry when I said it. I was just honest. I told him that I understood times were hard and housing was expensive, and raising 2 kids was no small thing. I told him that his mother and I had done everything we could to help, but I also told him that this was our home, and we had never agreed to give it up, and that what Nicole had presented was not something we were going to sign. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She told me you'd probably be open to it." I said, "Why would she think that?" He said, "She said you'd want to provide for us, that it was the loving thing to do." I said, "Daniel, providing for you and surrendering our home are not the same thing." He rubbed his face with both hands. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than just being tired. He said, "Dad, I think I need to have a different conversation with my wife." I said, "I think you're right." That conversation, whatever it contained, I was not present for. But the atmosphere in the house shifted after it. Nicole was cool toward me and Carol for days. She was polite but distant, which in some ways was a relief after years of her expanding presence. Daniel seemed like a man reorganizing his thoughts. Here is where I'll tell you about what happened next, because this is the part that required me and Carol to make the hardest decision. A week after the folder conversation, Carol came to find me in my home office. She closed the door behind her. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, the chair my father used to sit in, the chair that had been in 3 different houses with us over the decades. And she said, "Richard, I love our grandchildren and I love our son. But I cannot keep living like this." She wasn't dramatic about it. She wasn't crying. She was just clear, the way Carol gets, when she's moved past the emotional part of something and arrived at a decision. She said she'd been feeling invisible in her own home for 2 years. She said she was tired of modifying her behavior to avoid friction in rooms she'd chosen to paint for herself. She said she missed mornings that were just ours, quiet and slow, the way they'd been before. She said, "We worked our whole lives for this house in this chapter, and I feel like it's been taken from us one small piece at a time." I sat and listened to every word. Then I said, "What do you want to do?" She said, "I think we should tell them it's time." So we did. Carol and I sat down with Daniel and Nicole on a Thursday evening after the kids were in bed. I had written out the main points I wanted to make because I knew my emotions might get ahead of me if I didn't. I told them that we loved them, that we were glad we'd been able to help, that watching Caleb and Emma grow up in this house had been a genuine gift. And then I told them that the time had come for them to find their own home. I gave them 90 days. Nicole's expression cycled through several things quickly. Surprise, then calculation, then an attempt at composure. She said, "Richard, that's not very much time." "The market is," I said. 90 days is 3 months, Nicole. That's actually quite generous. I'll help Daniel look into first-time homebuyer programs in Ohio, and I'm willing to contribute toward closing costs as a gift, not as an exchange for anything. But this is not negotiable. She looked at Daniel. Daniel said, "Okay, Dad." Those 2 words almost broke me and also made me feel more certain than I had in years. The 90 days that followed were not comfortable. Nicole made sure of that in ways she could maintain deniability about. A particular tone of voice, a way of making Carol feel intrusive in communal spaces, pointed comments about how difficult the housing market was, as though reminding us the consequences of our decision. I noticed all of it, and I chose not to engage with it. Because here is what was also happening during those 90 days, quietly and productively. Daniel threw himself into the search. I think having a firm timeline, having his father draw a line for the first time, lit something in him. He contacted a real estate agent. He got pre-approved for a mortgage, which turned out to be more manageable than Nicole had led him to believe. Ohio does have first-time home buyer assistance programs, and his income qualified. He did the work. About 65 days into the 90, he called me at work. He said, "Dad, we found a place, 3 bedrooms, good school district, 20 minutes from you. We put in an offer and it was accepted." I sat at my desk and I genuinely teared up. Not because I was sad, because I was so relieved. The closing took 3 more weeks. Moving day landed on a Saturday in October. Clear sky, cool air, the kind of day that feels like a beginning. I rented a truck and brought 2 of my neighbors over to help. We loaded furniture and boxes and the kids' things and carried it all into a house with Daniel and Nicole's names on the deed. I stood in their new living room while Nicole was directing traffic on where to put furniture, and she looked over at me briefly. Something passed across her face. I'm still not sure what to call it. Not quite gratitude. Not quite an apology. Something that acknowledged, maybe for the first time, that she had pushed too hard, and I had held my ground, and here we were, on the other side of it. She said, "Thank you for helping with the truck, Richard." I said, "Of course, it's a nice house, Nicole." And that was it. That evening, after everyone had gone, Carol and I walked through our house. Just the 2 of us, room by room, slowly. The kitchen was ours again. The living room couch was back. We'd quietly brought it out of the garage 2 weeks earlier, and Nicole hadn't said a word. The hallway was still the wrong color, but we could repaint that. Carol made tea and we sat at our kitchen table, the same table where the folder had been placed 8 months earlier. And we just sat there, quiet, holding our cups. She said, "This is what I missed." I said, "I know. I want to be honest with you about the part that still sits with me. My son is a good man who lost his footing for a while. I've asked myself many times what my own role was in that. I let things go on too long. I choose accommodation over clarity, more times than I should have. There's a lesson in that for me too. When you love someone, sometimes the most loving thing is not to make it easy for them to stay comfortable in a situation that isn't working. Daniel and I talk regularly now. He comes over for Sunday dinner sometimes, just him and the kids, while Nicole does her own thing, which is fine. We're figuring out what the new version of our relationship looks like, and I think it's going to be genuinely good. He told me recently that he wished I had been firmer earlier. He said, "I needed you to say no, Dad. I didn't know how to say it myself." I've thought about that a lot. As for Nicole, we are cordial. She's the mother of my grandchildren, and that means everything. I don't carry anger toward her, not because what she did was acceptable, but because I can't afford to. I will say this. A woman who would slide a deed across a breakfast table and call it logical is a woman who learned somewhere that if you frame something as practical, you can get away with almost anything. I hope she finds what she's really looking for, and I hope she stops looking for it in other people's homes. Carol and I have plans now that we haven't made in years. A trip to Yellowstone in the spring. A week in Savannah in October. Small things. A standing breakfast date on Fridays at a diner 8 blocks away. Just the 2 of us. Unhurried. Last week we repainted the hallway together. We chose a warm cream color, Carol's choice, and we did it ourselves over a weekend with the radio on. The house feels like ours again. When I look back at that folder, I understand now that it was never really about the house or the deed or estate planning. It was about whether I would stand up for what I'd spent my life building, or hand it over, because someone had thought up a calm, rational-sounding reason why I should. I didn't hand it over. And if you're sitting somewhere right now in a similar situation, if someone is reframing your generosity as an obligation or dressing up their ambition as concern for your well-being, I want you to hear this clearly. Being older does not mean being done. Having worked hard does not mean owing it all to someone else. Your home, your assets, your future, these are yours. You earned them. And no folder, no bullet point summary sheet, no talk of logical solutions changes that. You are allowed to say no, even to family. Especially to family. Carol just called me for dinner. She made pot roast, something she hasn't made in 4 years because Nicole thought the smell was too strong. I could smell it from my office, rich and warm, filling the whole house. Some things, it turns out, are very easy to take back. I've had a lot of time to sit with everything that happened, and if there's one thing I keep coming back to, it's this. The consequences we experience in life are rarely random. They grow, slowly and predictably, from the choices we make and the choices we fail to make. For years I chose the path of least resistance. I let small things go because confronting them felt unkind. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I told myself I was being patient and generous. But if I'm honest, I was avoiding discomfort, and every time I looked the other way, the situation grew a little more entrenched, a little harder to reverse. That is how a temporary arrangement becomes a 4-year occupation. Not through any single dramatic moment, but through the slow accumulation of small surrenders. Nicole didn't arrive at our kitchen table with that folder on day one. She arrived there because, step by step, nobody stopped her. I have to own my part in that. The world has a way of expanding to fill whatever space you leave unguarded, and I left quite a bit unguarded for quite a long time. But here is what I also know. It is never too late to stand up for what is right. The moment Carol sat across from me in my office and said she couldn't keep living that way, something clarified in me. Not anger. Clarity. I knew what I had to do, and I knew I had the tools to do it, because Carol and I had been responsible and thoughtful enough to plan ahead. The trust we had set up with Patricia wasn't luck. It was the result of taking our future seriously before anyone else tried to take it from us. Preparation is its own form of quiet strength, and that day it protected everything we had built. What strikes me most, looking back, is how much damage is done when intelligence is separated from integrity. Nicole is a smart woman. She researched, she prepared, she framed her plan in rational language. But intelligence without ethical grounding is just a more sophisticated way to cause harm. True wisdom isn't only knowing how to get what you want, it's knowing what you have the right to want in the first place, and where your claim ends and someone else's life begins. Daniel had to learn that too, in his own way. He is a resilient young man, and I believe the difficulty of this chapter will serve him better than any easy path would have. There is something that happens to a person when they face a hard truth about themselves and choose to grow from it rather than run from it. I've watched my son become steadier, more grounded, more himself in the months since they moved into their own home. That is not a small thing. As for me, I am not the same man who sat silently while his kitchen was rearranged around him. I am clearer now about what I will accept and what I won't. Not out of stubbornness, but out of self-respect. Carol and I have rebuilt something in this house that goes beyond square footage or deed or market value. We've reclaimed our mornings, our rhythms, our peace, and that, more than anything, is what I was really fighting for. If you are in the middle of something like this right now, I want to leave you with the thing I wish someone had told me earlier. Protecting what you've earned is not selfish. Holding your boundary is not cruelty. And the clearer and earlier you are, the less damage there is for everyone, including the people you love. Carol's pot roast is on the stove. I'm going to go enjoy it.